Fellas, considering we just got the announcement that UFC 304 is going to be headlined by Edwards and Muhammad and Aspinall versus Blades, and the fact that this weekend's fight night actually has a British fighter in it, I thought I'd do a tier list of the best or all the main British fighters in the UFC. I've practically taken every British fighter in the UFC at the high level. I haven't included the ones that are pretty much needed to be cut from the UFC, but all the main British fighters on this tier list ranked from S tier to D tier. I know I've been doing tier lists a lot recently, so I'm going to slow down, but considering we have had a lot of British fighters announced recently, let's do a tier list, starting off with a guy who's going to be on the UFC 304 card as announced today, and he's going to be taking on Bobby Green, and it's Paddy Pimblett. Now, for Paddy Pimblett, if you'd have asked me this a couple of fights ago, I'd have put him in C tier, but right now, I'm going to give Paddy Pimblett B tier. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with that, you know, that might be too high of a ranking for Pimblett, but I feel like A tier and S tier is like champion contender level, and then C tier and D tier is like bums, get them out the UFC, and I feel like Pimblett's in the middle. He's knocking on that top 15 area of the lightweight division. I mean, he's got a fight with Bobby Green, which is big for Pimblett's career. He's had some decent wins in the UFC, obviously his last win over Tony Ferguson. I understand Tony Ferguson is washed and whatever, but for Paddy Pimblett's, you know, for Paddy Pimblett's level, that's fairly skilled for Pimblett to do that. He's shown that his wrestling's improved. Obviously, he's got good jiu-jitsu, and he's a big lightweight as well. So for Paddy Pimblett, I'd put him in the middle. He's average. There's nothing special about Paddy Pimblett. There's nothing about Paddy Pimblett that you can look at and say, yes, this guy's a future champion, a future contender. But at the same time, I feel like he deserves to be in the B tier. His average is in the middle. So Paddy Pimblett, compared to the rest of the guys on this list, do I think he's going to be a champion? No. Are we ever going to see Paddy Pimblett in any #1 contender fights? No. But I feel like he's in that perfect middle part for the tier list. So for Paddy Pimblett, even though a lot of people are going to disagree, I'm sticking him in B tier. I think he's a mid fighter. He's got some good qualities, he's got some bad qualities, and I do feel like people are going to disagree, but for Pimblett, I'm putting him straight into B tier. And then we've got the guy that is going to be headlining a card this weekend, Lon Murphy. Yeah, he's headlining UFC, he's headlining a fight night against Edson Barboza. You know what? I'm going to put Lon Murphy in B tier as well. I'm also going to put him in B tier. He's similar to Pimblett. He's floating around that top 15 area of the featherweight division. Lon Murphy, I do think he's got potential to be a contender more than Pimblett, so I would put him above Pimblett in B tier, but he hasn't really proven it yet. He's got some good wins, but they're not flashy wins. He's not the most entertaining fights, and you look at the guys he's beaten, a lot of those are close decisions, or it's fights that he's losing badly, and then he's able to pick up a win off the end of it. So it's not like he's going out there and completely shattering guys. There's a lot of close wins on his record, and I do think Edson Barboza is going to beat him this weekend, but I've got to give it to him. He's a great wrestler, is Lon Murphy, and I feel like his stand-up's improving, and the fact that he's headlining a fight night, and if he can get past Edson Barboza, you know, that's only going to push him further in his career. So for Lon Murphy, again, similar to Pimblett, he's a fairly average featherweight. There's nothing I can, you know, look at this guy so far and say he's going to win a belt or anything like that, but he's fairly skilled. He needs to prove it more. So for Lon Murphy, I'm putting him in B tier for now. Let's see how he does this weekend before we start calling him a proper contender in the featherweight division. And then we've got Paul Craig, the Bear Jew, the guy with arguably the pound-for-pound worst striking in the UFC. He's just been finished by Caio Bravo at UFC 301. I'm going to put Paul Craig. I'm going to put him in C tier. I understand people are going to really hate the fact that I've put him below Pimblett. I know he's got wins over Magomed Ankalaev. I know he's got wins over Jamal Hill. I know he's got wins over Nikita Krylov, but he's just not consistent enough for me to put him in B tier. B tier has to be I mean, actually, you know what? Maybe he is in B tier because he is around that top 15 area. He was literally just ranked, but I feel like he's not consistent enough. Like, he's been finished in his last two. Nah, in fact, no. I'll put Paul Craig in B tier. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I feel like I can't really put Pimblett above Paul Craig. So actually, you know what? I will give Paul Craig the benefit. He's beaten some top contenders. But yeah, he's not consistent enough. His striking is awful. And I feel like for Paul Craig, he's got one game plan. Fall into his guard, fall for the triangle, fall for the armbar. That doesn't work, you're done. Simple as that. He's got one plan. He wants it to be on the ground. He wants to find the submission, and if he's not going to find the submission, he's going to try and roll you into ground and pound and beat you with ground and pound. And if that don't work, he's got nothing. As far as well-rounded goes, he's one of the least well-rounded fighters on this list. But I have to give him B tier. I can't really put Paddy Pimblett above him when Paul Craig has had some top wins and literally was just ranked. So I'll give Paul Craig B tier. I'll give him that. Then we've got the headliner of UFC 304, Leon Edwards. Yeah, Edwards has to go in S tier. I mean, one of the greatest British fighters of all time. Yeah, he's had a pretty decent UFC career so far. I mean, he's only had a handful of losses, one of them being the guy that he's beaten twice. Knocking out a pound-for-pound king, Kamaru Usman, is his biggest winner. I mean, look at what Usman did to the welterweight division. And then for Leon to go out there, be the first guy to sleep him in the UFC and beat him in the UFC. And then to go out there and beat him by decision as well. A lot of people were saying it was a fluke knockout, and if it went to a 5-rounder, he'd have lost. And then he goes out there and wins a decision. He's just got that win over Colby Covington as well. Leon Edwards is super well-rounded as well. As far as skill set goes, he's one of the most well-rounded fighters in the UFC. He can grapple, he can strike, he can do it all, and I really do feel like, unless like a guy like Shavkat beats him or JDM, he's going to be holding on to that welterweight belt for a long time. I do think he's going to beat Belal Muhammad, and he was beating Belal Muhammad in that first fight that they had too. So for Leon Edwards, I'm putting him in S tier. Arguably the best fighter to come from the UK, especially right now at least. Great champion, one of the pound-for-pound best in the UFC, full stop. So Leon Edwards, S tier, the best, or at least one of the best fighters in the UK, in the UFC right now. And I really do feel like he's going to go out there and beat Belal Muhammad at UFC 304, because Belal Muhammad, listen mate, you got destroyed in that first fight, and it's going to be even rougher in the next fight after what we've seen Leon Edwards doing recently against guys like Colby and Usman. So for Leon Edwards, straight S tier. Another guy that's fighting on UFC 304, Muhammad Makhachev. Muhammad Makhachev, I'm going to put him in A tier. I'm going to put him in A tier. He's in that contender spot where one win away from fighting for a belt. Makhachev has got some flaws in his game. I mean, even in his last fight against Alex Perez, his striking looked very suspicious. Every single time Perez was in striking range, Makhachev would shoot for a double leg takedown. And Makhachev's got that similar thing to, I guess, Paul Craig, where he almost faces adversity in every single one of his fights. Whether it's him getting beaten on the feet or him getting a big submission on him where he somehow escapes. I feel like Makhachev has issues and adversity in every single one of his fights, but you've got to give him credit. Every one of these fights that he has adversity in, he comes back and gets a finish, or at least he gets the decision win. He hasn't had that trademark win and that statement-making win over a top-level opponent yet. His last win was against Alex Perez, which was a bit of an iffy win. Before that, it was Tim Elliott. And he's going to be fighting Manel Kape, and if he does beat Manel Kape, he's going to be fighting for a belt, so I've got to put him in A tier. He's about 2 wins away from that belt, 1 win away from a title shot. As far as wrestling goes, great wrestler, but there are some holes in Makhachev's game, so I can't put him in S tier, especially when he hasn't really beaten a top contender yet. So for Muhammad Makhachev, he's better than the guys in B tier because he's actually proved that he's contender level, but I'll put him in A tier for now. He's not proved himself to be S tier, and I feel like he's going to go out there and beat Manel Kape, but as of right now, I think it's fair that we put Muhammad Makhachev in A tier. Another guy that's on UFC 304, Arnold Allen. I'm also going to be putting Arnold Allen in A tier. He's faced the top guys, and I mean like the top guys, and he has fallen short. He lost to Max Holloway, one of the best in the UFC. Absolutely no shame in that. And he went to a decision and arguably put one of the best performances against Max Holloway compared to the rest of the featherweights, which aged really well. He had a fight loss against Movsar Evloev at UFC 297, but again, another controversial loss. A lot of people thought Arnold Allen should have won that fight, and a lot of the decisions from the ref in that fight was very suspicious. And before that, he's gone out there. He's got a great win over Dan Hooker that a lot of people forget. And I understand the win over Calvin Kattar was quite, it wasn't the best win because Kattar got injured. But Arnold Allen overall, really solid fighter. I think he's going to go out there and beat Giga Chikadze. Obviously, I'm not going to let my predictions get in the way of this tier list, but he's a really solid fighter. He's well-rounded, he's tough as nails, he comes to scrap, he's got power. He is the definition of a scrapper. Arnold Allen, again, he's only like 1 or 2 wins from being chucked right back into that title picture. Do I think he's going to hold a belt? Truthfully, no. I don't think he's going to get past the guys like Volkanovski, Topuria, and Holloway, but I feel like he's going to fit perfectly in that top 5 spot of the featherweight division. So for Arnold Billy Allen, chuck him in A tier. Definitely one of the better British fighters in the UFC, and in my opinion, the best British featherweight. A guy who, surprisingly, isn't on UFC 304, and it's quite shit. I'm quite mad that he's not on UFC 304, man. MVP. I wanted to see this guy on UFC 304. Now, maybe they are cooking up a Fight Night main event. Let's not judge too soon. But I would have loved to see this guy on 304. And considering that he's not on the main card, I assume he's not going to be on the card at all. For MVP, I'm going to put him... I don't just want to stack this tier list with B tiers, but I feel like I've got to put him in B tier. But at the same time, it's hard because I don't want to put MVP on the same level as Paddy Pimblett and Paul Craig. Now, actually, I'll put MVP in A tier. I'll put him in A tier. I'll put him at the back end of A tier. He hasn't actually proved that he's like a top contender yet because he's only winning the UFC is Kevin Holland, and he has kind of got a reputation for being a can crusher in Bellator. The win over Kevin Holland was impressive. Most people thought Holland was going to go out there and get the win, and MVP looked really good in that fight. I don't know who he's going to be fighting next, whether it's a Jeff Neal or whoever it ends up being. I think he's going to stay in the top 10 of the welterweight division. He does have potential to get in that title picture. He's only one win away. Maybe if he goes out there and beats a guy like Jeff Neal, he can be chucked in that title picture. I feel kind of shameful if I stick him on the same category as Piml and Paul Craig. So for MVP, I'll put him on the back end of A tier. I do think he's going to really struggle, though, when he faces a wrestler. He's not really that well-rounded. He's a really elusive, really great counterpuncher, really solid striker, but his wrestling has a lot of holes, as we saw in Bellator, and in the fight with Holland as well. So for MVP, I'll chuck him in A tier. Great fighter, really entertaining, but again, I wouldn't say he's title worthy. I'd put him on the back end of A tier. Then we've got, I think you lot love this fighter, Molly McCann. Molly McCann's going in D tier. Yeah, her performance has recently been absolute garbage. She lost to Storyalenko, a person that she should have beaten, a fighter that she should have beaten. I'm pretty sure at the time, Storyalenko had a record of like 10 wins and 8 losses, or might have been the other way around. And she got finished in the first round. She got absolutely humiliated against Erin Blankfield, and fair enough, Blankfield's one of the best. In her last win, I'll give it her. Molly McCann looked good. And she has got a good few highlight reels, but insanely overrated, man. Super overrated. And I feel like Molly McCann's going to be one of those fighters that she wins some, she loses some. She's never going to get to the top end of the division. But I think she's always going to be a big name because she's got a loud mouth and she's friends with Paddy Pimblett. Molly McCann, honestly, I don't hate her, but I feel like the UFC don't need her. I'm putting her in D tier. Compared to the rest of the guys on this list, she's not contender material, she's not champion material, and she showed that 2 fights ago when she lost to a can that she should have beaten. So for Molly McCann, straight D tier. Then we've got Mick Parkin. Mick Parkin trains with Tom Aspinall. He's got a win over Mohammed Usman, which is quite impressive. I think he's undefeated as well. I think he's actually undefeated in MMA. I don't know if he's fully undefeated. Definitely undefeated in the UFC at least. Mick Parkin I'll put in C tier. He hasn't had any performances that say he's bad, but there's nothing to put him on B tier. I can't really put him on the same tier as Lon Murphy. He's not a ranked fighter. He's not in like a fighter against a ranked opponent next. Plus, he's in the heavyweight division, which definitely brings your skill down a little bit. But for Mick Parkin, he's got a good win over Mohammed Usman. He's fairly well-rounded. He's one of the better fat heavyweights in the UFC. And I feel like he's definitely going to be one of these guys that hangs around the top 10 to top 15 area of the heavyweight division. I don't think he's going to enter the top 10. I think most guys in the top 10, and quite frankly, a few guys in the top 15 beat him, but he's skilled. And I'm going to put him in C tier. He's not bad. He's not trash. He's just another fighter in the UFC that happens to be from the UK. Shouldn't get cut. Knocking on the doors of the rankings, but isn't yet a contender, so I can't put him in B tier. Then we've got Tom Aspinall. You know what? I'm going to put Tom Aspinall in S tier. Yeah, great fighter. Honestly, he's a great fighter. What he's done in the UFC so far, knocking out Sergey Pavlovich. Great win there. So for Tom Aspinall, I'm going to have to put him in S tier. He is one of the best British fighters, and I really do feel like he's going to retire as the greatest heavyweight in UFC history. Not the greatest British fighter, the greatest heavyweight in history of the UFC. I think this guy's got so much potential. I'm pretty sure he's the only guy in the pound-for-pound rankings right now who doesn't actually own or has never held an undisputed belt. Defending the interim belt is ridiculous. He would beat John Jones. He's knocked out Sergey Pavlovich, knocked out Marcin Tybura, both in the first round, by the way, submitted Alexander Volkov in the first round, beaten Sergey Spivak in the first round. He's got the shortest average fight time in UFC history. He can grapple. He can strike. He's got power. He's got a good chin. He has got everything. He's like the Alexander Volkanovski, prime Volkanovski of the heavyweight division. He is the best fighter in the UFC. Tom Aspinall, straight S tier. And he's going to go out there, and all respect to Curtis Blades, I'm still very grateful for what you did for Jelton Almeida. Putting Jelton Almeida out there and ending on misery. I am so grateful for that. But for Curtis Blades and Aspinall, I've got Aspinall winning. And Aspinall, he's one of the best British fighters in the UFC. Straight S tier. And I really do feel like he has potential to, like I said, retire as the greatest heavyweight of all time. Next on the list, we have Jai Herbert. One of Leon Edwards' friends, and he's just ass. I'm going to put him in D tier. Obviously, he's got that viral fight where he got knocked out by Ilia Topuria. I just feel like with Jai Herbert, every single time we see him fight, he's in boring fights. Whether it be boring on the feet where it's just a bunch of leg kicks, or grappling exchanges where absolutely nothing is going on. Jai Herbert's just not a fun fighter, and most of the time he's not winning in these fights as well. He's losing decisions or getting knocked out by guys like Topuria in the division above him. So for Jai Herbert, I'm putting him in a D tier. I think he should be cut from the UFC. I don't know why he's in the UFC. I guess he had a decent run in Cage Warriors and he's friends with Leon Edwards. So it's kind of like Leon Edwards as the older brother, and he's inviting Jai Herbert, who's the younger brother here. But yeah, Jai Herbert, I have to put him in D tier. He's just not that great. Then we've got Jack Shaw. He lost to Brito at UFC 301. Jack Shaw, here's the thing. I hate to put him in C tier because at one point he was a B tier fighter, but I've got to put him in C tier. He's got a very podgy physique, does this guy. No, he was undefeated 2 fights ago. He has suffered 2 losses now. Well, I don't think it was 2 fights ago, but obviously he has suffered 2 losses in his MMA career. Yeah, he's a good wrestler. He's fairly well-rounded, I guess. He's improved his game as well. I guess he's a decent British fighter, but I just don't think he's ever going to crack the rankings of the featherweight division. I think he's a fairly... I don't like saying this because it sounds like an insult, but he's a bit of a mid-fighter. After that fight with Brito, he's going to be out for a while, and I just don't think Jack Shaw strikes me as the type of guy to climb any rankings. I think, again, similar to Mick Parkin, he's just another fighter in the UFC that happens to be from the UK. He's from Wales, so for Jack Shaw, he's not bad, and I really do think he's got, a chance to beat on these unranked guys, but as of right now, I have to put him in C tier. There's nothing that this guy's shown me to show me that he deserves anything above a C tier, but that is my list of the best British fighters and the worst in the UFC right now. Let me know your thoughts on this tier list and the rankings, and let me know your thoughts on UFC 304. Personally, I think it's a great card. I think a lot of the fights we already knew were coming beforehand. Let me know your thoughts on UFC 304 and your predictions for Murphy and Barboza. Thank you for watching.